The coordinates hidden at the end of Marcus Vance's final broadcast were precise. 39.178, 106.445. 4W. They point directly to Mount Elbert, the highest and most brutal peak in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Official reports from the winter of 1985 claim that a sudden avalanche destroyed a high-altitude military weather station near the summit, killing 5 researchers. The government stated the bodies were never recovered due to extreme weather conditions. My name is Ethan. I spent 8 years in the U.S. Army Mountain Warfare Unit, tracking targets in places where normal soldiers couldn't survive. When Marcus' decrypted data leaked online, I recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't a weather anomaly. I packed my military-grade winter gear, grabbed my custom Remington rifle, and drove straight toward Colorado. The locals in the town of Twin Lakes warned me not to go up the mountain. They spoke of the white howl, a strange, rhythmic wind that drives animals insane, forcing elk and wolves to sprint off the cliffs to their deaths. They thought it was a curse. I knew it was a cover story. I began my climb during what was supposed to be a clear winter afternoon. But as soon as I crossed the 11,000-foot marker, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in less than 2 minutes. A monstrous blizzard rolled in from nowhere, wiping out all visibility. I checked my tactical GPS unit. The screen glitched, cracked, and went completely dead. My satellite phone battery, which was fully charged inside my insulated vest, drained to 0 in seconds. The extreme cold wasn't just freezing my skin. It was actively killing my electronics. Lost in the blinding whiteout, my combat boots struck something metallic. It was a rusted chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Following the perimeter, I found it. The abandoned military weather station from 1985. Dieu noir, cat. It wasn't destroyed by an avalanche. The concrete walls were fully intact, but the heavy steel-reinforced doors were warped and bent outward, as if something incredibly powerful had forced its way out from the inside. I crawled inside the frozen concrete hallway to escape the freezing wind, keeping my rifle ready. The air inside was completely stagnant, smelling faintly of old copper and freezer burn. Using my tactical flashlight to illuminate the dark, I noticed old blood spatters on the frozen floor. But they weren't red. The liquid had frozen into a strange, thick, dark gray, crystalline structure. Near the main security desk, I found a leather logbook belonging to the head researcher, Dr. Eris. The notes from December 1985 revealed a terrifying military operation called Project Boreas. The military wasn't studying the weather here. They were testing cryogenic human augmentation. They wanted to create a soldier whose blood could not freeze, a predator designed to operate in Arctic war zones without any survival gear. Doctor, Iris wrote, the mutation is unstable. Subject Boreas 2 no longer generates body heat. It consumes it. It drains the thermal energy from everything around it to survive. The colder the storm, the stronger it becomes. Suddenly, the howling wind outside changed its rhythm. It wasn't the sound of nature anymore. It became a low, pulsing vibration that rattled the concrete walls, a frequency that made my chest tighten with pure dread. I raised my rifle, looking through the tactical scope toward the dark hallway. Through the thick frost on the glass, I saw a towering shape. A massive entity covered in thick, coarse, gray-white fur was standing perfectly still at the end of the corridor. Its broad shoulders filled the space. It had no eyes, but its massive head turned slowly, locking directly onto the heat radiating from my living body. My military training kicked in before my brain could process the terror. Seeing that massive shape at the end of the hall, I didn't hesitate. I raised my custom Remington rifle, locked the crosshairs onto its massive torso, and fired 3 heavy caliber rounds. The deafening roars of my rifle echoed through the concrete bunker. I saw the sparks. I heard the terrifying sound of lead flattening and ricocheting. The bullets didn't pierce its body. They simply deflected off its impossibly dense frozen armor of fur and muscle, leaving not a single drop of blood. The shots didn't stop it. They only made it angry. The entity bared its teeth and charged forward with a heavy thudding stride that shook the very foundation of the building. I dropped my empty magazine, turned on my heel, and bolted through the shattered security doors, throwing myself straight into the roaring fury of the mountain blizzard. The cold outside hit my face like a sheet of broken glass. I couldn't see my own boots in the whiteout. Behind me, the heavy wooden frame of the bunker entrance exploded into splinters. The beast had just smashed through it like paper. I ran blindly down the rocky ridge, trying to find cover among the frozen boulders. But the physical environment was changing. The temperature around me was dropping even lower, defying all laws of nature. The creature was tracking me through the storm, and its massive, heavy footsteps were growing louder, crunching through the deep snow crust behind. Then, the infrasound hit my brain. The low hum of the wind suddenly morphed into a chorus of whispers. I heard the voices of my old platoon members from my army daysmen, who died years ago, shouting my name through the blizzard. "Ethan, over here. We found the extraction cave. Ethan, run to the light." I stopped, my lungs burning from the frozen air. Through the blinding snow, I saw a bright, flickering yellow light about 50 yards away. My frozen mind wanted to believe it. I wanted to run toward my old friends. I took 2 steps forward, but then I looked down at my tactical vest. The small analog compass pinned to my chest was spinning violently in circles. The electromagnetic field generated by Project Boreas was warping everything. The light wasn't a campfire. The voices weren't real. It was the beast, using its biological frequency to trigger hypothermic hallucinations in my brain, baiting me to walk straight off the edge of a 500-foot cliff. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper, using the sharp pain to break the illusion. The ghostly lights and soldiers vanished instantly. In their place, just 10 feet in front of me, was a massive, pitch-black abyss. One more step, and I would have been a frozen corpse at the bottom of the canyon. I turned around, my back to the cliff, raising my weapon with freezing hands. Through the swirling white curtain of the blizzard, the entity finally stepped into the moonlight. It was a monstrous, towering apex predator, covered in thick, heavy matted fur of a sickening gray-white color. It looked like a myth born from ice and military science. Its shoulders were wider than a steel door, and its massive arms ended in claws that could easily crush a human skull. It had no eyes, but its massive scarred face tilted downward, tracking the column of hot breath rising from my mouth. My bullets were useless against that thick armored coat. I was out of ammo, trapped on the edge of a cliff, facing a monster that couldn't be killed. Standing on the razor's edge of that frozen cliff, with a 9-foot wall of muscle and gray-white fur closing in, I had only one tactical option left. I reached into my chest pouch, pulled out a high-intensity magnesium flare, and slammed it against my vest to ignite it. The blinding, superheated white chemical light exploded in the darkness of the blizzard. The beast didn't have eyes, but its sensitive thermal receptors were instantly overwhelmed by the sudden spike of extreme heat. It roared a deafening sound like tearing metal and blocked its face with its massive fur-covered forearms. Using its temporary blindness, I dove to the right, sliding down a steep, icy couloir. I knew from the old topographical maps that this ridge sat right above the entrance to the abandoned Eldorado gold mine, sealed since the late 1940s. I crashed through the rotten, snow-covered wooden timbers, blocking the main shaft, tumbling into the pitch-black, frozen depths of the mountain. I scrambled to my feet, pulled my tactical flashlight, and wedged a heavy iron mining beam across the broken entrance. It wouldn't stop the beast, but it would buy me time. My body was shivering violently, but the air inside the tunnel was dead and dry. I needed to check my gear. I pulled out Dr. Eris's journal from my pack, along with a secondary file Thomas had clipped to the back of it. It was a collection of radio logs and letters from independent trackersmen who hunted monsters for a living. As I shone my light on the yellowed pages, my heart sank. One letter from 1991, written by a legendary tracker known only as Vogel. Read. We took the contract for Sector 2. We tracked it for 3 days. My men have armor-piercing rounds, but they bounced off its hide like pebbles. It killed half my crew using our own voices against us. We are burning our maps. No amount of money is worth hunting this thing. It is not an animal. It is an executioner. Another report from a private military contractor stated that 3 separate alpha-level hunter groups had flatly refused to enter Mount Elbert. They marked the entire mountain as a red zonian area to be completely abandoned. But I read the warning too late. I was already in its lair. Deep within the mine shafts, the temperature began to plummet again. The moisture from my breath froze mid-air, turning into tiny falling needles of ice. The beast hadn't stayed outside. It had followed my ascent down into the dark. From the deep, forgotten lower levels of the gold mine, a sound began to echo through the stone walls. It wasn't the sound of the wind anymore. It was a radio signal. A cracked, distorted voice came through the broken speaker of an old 1140s mining intercom mounted on the wall. It was the voice of Marcus Van Seeth, sheriff, from the first video. The voice was laughing, but it sounded completely hollow, repeating a single line over and over. Ethan, you shouldn't have come to Colorado. There's no hope here, only bones. The distorted voice of Sheriff Marcus kept laughing through the rusty intercom speaker. It was a cold, mechanical sound that didn't belong to a human anymore. But the laughter wasn't just echoing from the metal box on the wall. It was vibrating in the air right behind me. The temperature in the shaft plummeted so fast that the sweat inside my tactical jacket turned into sharp crystals of ice against my skin. Wow. I whipped my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the freezing fog. There it was, the towering mass of matted gray-white fur materialized from the dark. Up close, the beast was a mountain of muscle, its shoulders so wide they scraped against the raw stone walls of the gold mine. It didn't rush. It crouched low, its massive clawed arms twitching, tracking the violent thumping of my heart. It knew I had nowhere left to run. This tunnel was a dead end. Image prompt for Bing. A terrifying cinematic. I took a desperate step back, my shaking, numb fingers trying to ram a fresh magazine into my rifle. But the air was too cold. My coordination was failing. And then the ancient, rotten wooden floor beneath my combat boots groaned. Before I could jump, the timbers snapped with a sound like a lightning strike. The ground vanished. I fell straight through the dark, screaming, my body crashing violently through old 19th century wooden support structures and sharp rock shelves. I hit the hard, icy floor of a lower, completely forgotten cavern with a force that knocked all the air from my lungs. My rifle clattered somewhere into the dark. My tactical flashlight was flickering badly, casting chaotic, dying flashes of light against the stone walls. I was bleeding. Every bone in my body screamed in pain. But I was still alive. Above me, through the jagged hole in the ceiling, The monster let out a deafening screech of pure frustration. It was already clawing at the gap, widening it to drop down after me. Panic overrode the pain. I scrambled through the freezing dust on my hands and knees, my fingers frantically sweeping the stone floor to find my gear. In the dying light of my flashlight, I saw what I had landed next to. It was an old, smashed military transport cart from the 1940s, buried under decades of cave-ins. I didn't care about the historical ruin. My hand struck a heavy green wooden crate stamped with a faded U.S. Army serial number. With the last ounce of my strength, I ripped the rusty metal latches open. Inside, packed tightly in yellow dry sawdust to protect them from the damp, were solid sticks of old industrial dynamite. Next to them lay the mechanical friction fuses. This stuff was ancient, unstable, and highly volatile. A single spark could blow me to pieces before the monster even touched me. But, looking up at the ceiling, I knew I didn't have a choice. The massive gray-white entity finally forced its bulk through the broken floor. It hit the cavern ground with a sickening, heavy thud that made the stone beneath me jump. The blast of freezing air rolling off its body was suffocating. Its eyeless, scarred head swung toward me, locking instantly onto the intense heat of my panicking body. It bared its teeth, preparing to lunge. I struck the friction fuse against the stone wall. A blinding spray of orange sparks hissed into life, illuminating the terrifying face of the beast just feet away. I didn't aim for the monster. I slammed the burning bundle of dynamite deep into a massive, structurally weak crack at the base of the cavern's main supporting granite pillar. I didn't stay to watch. I threw my tactical pack over my shoulder and dove headfirst into a narrow, low-drainage tunnel that sloped sharply downward toward the valley. I crawled like a madman, dragging my broken body through the mud and ice. 3 seconds later, the world ended. The explosion didn't just sound loud. It hit my ears like a physical blow, blowing out my eardrums. A blinding flash of orange fire tore through the upper shafts, turning the freezing mist into a furnace. The supporting pillar disintegrated. In a cataclysmic roar of tearing stone, millions of tons of solid granite came crashing down. The lower level of the Eldorado mine caved in completely, burying Project Boreas under a permanent, unyielding grave of solid rock. The mountain had spoken, and the beast was finally silent. Ethan crawled out of the mountain drainage system 6 hours later, alive but broken. The world thinks Mount Elbert is just a tourist destination. They don't know about the war that was fought under the ice. But the encrypted data Ethan dragged out of that collapse holds a much darker truth. The Froststalker was only the second phase of a program that didn't start in America. The files reveal that the original research from the 1940s was recovered from the ruins of occupied Europe. The military simply tried to rebuild what was left behind in Poland inside the pitch-black tunnels of a forgotten, abandoned Nazi concentration camp, where millions were systematically destroyed. The documents state that the very first original prototype of genetic catalyst for all these nightmares never left that soil. It was born from the ash of the crematoriums and the blood of innocent victims, locked deep in the underground concrete bunkers beneath the camp, still waiting in the dark. Still waiting in the dark. We have embedded the newly recovered coordinates into the final frames of this transmission. Find the hidden map, decode the numbers. The hunt is leaving America. The next chapter is moving to Poland. If you think you can find where the first nightmare is nesting, leave your coordinates below. But remember, some graves should never be opened. Stay alive.